Welcome back to 20 Spiritual Secrets. If you missed the first spiritual video, because this is spiritual secret number 2, please do go back and listen to that one first to get the full benefit and all the spiritual wisdom that these videos are going to offer you. Again, may I recommend you find somewhere quiet where you won't be disturbed, where you can sit and lie down and close your eyes and let the spiritual wisdom sink in. And my second spiritual secret is courage. The second spiritual secret is courage. In my late teens, I got a job for a few days a week in an old person's home. I'll be honest here and say my first motivation for taking the job wasn't because I felt called to attend to the aged and infirm, but because my family and myself urgently needed the extra cash. However, what began as a means to increase income ended up being a game changer. I worked there for a year or so, but what I learned transformed my mind, my heart, and my soul. I think everyone should have the privilege of spending time with those close to the end of their lives on earth, as it is a deeply humbling and empowering experience. I'm aware I'm getting a bit morbid here, but spending time with people close to death does tend to sharpen the mind, pull your focus towards what really matters in this life, and makes you realise how much of what we think is important just isn't. I am forever grateful that I learned this profound truth relatively early in life. Many take decades to learn it. I am also profoundly grateful for perhaps the most significant lesson I learned from the dying, and that was to live my life with courage. Several of the dying had regrets and wanted to talk to me about those regrets when their time came, and the constant theme that came through over and over again was wishing they'd had more courage. But what is a life of courage? A life of courage is one in which you are emotionally honest with yourself and others. It is also a life where you stop feeling guilty and simply give yourself permission to be you and to be happy being you. In other words, you are true to who you are and not what others think or expect you to be. This sounds very simple in theory, but in practice it truly isn't. I think the best way to explain what I mean here is to tell you a story about a beautiful lady called Jane, whom I befriended when working in that old people's home all those decades ago. About Jane. Jane was 94 when I met her. She was quiet with deep blue eyes and hair so white and soft it looked like freshly fallen snow. There was something about her energy I liked immediately. I could tell she would have been formidable in her prime. Within days, I found myself lingering for longer than usual to chat with her, and she began to tell me her life story. What struck me initially was how fascinating her life had been and how much she had done with it. She had travelled widely, enjoyed a career as a headmistress, and set up charity-run schools in Africa. She had 6 children and 7 grandchildren. Her husband had passed away over 40 years ago, but taking care of her children and her school career had kept her too busy to grieve for long. Things didn't quite add up with Jane. However, as she had done so much in her life and had such a vast family, but there were never any visitors. I asked her if her family lived abroad, and she shook her head and said she hadn't had a proper visit from her children or grandchildren in 17 years. They had become strangers. She said this in such a matter-of-fact way it made me want to cry. It was sad. I visited Jane even more after that and so enjoyed our chats. I toyed with the idea of trying to get in touch with her family without her knowing, to ask them to visit, but then I realised that wasn't my place. 2 weeks before she died, Jane said something that went straight to my heart. She told me she could sometimes see me getting anxious and upset, and I worked very hard. She told me I deserved to live a happy life without regrets. She said she had always felt guilty about being happy in her life, always thought work was the most important thing, but what she didn't realise was that along the way she just forgot to be happy, forgot how important it was to feel happy. She hadn't really had time for her children because she was always thinking she should be doing something else. She told me she regretted that bitterly, and I should learn from that. The next morning, when I went to see Jane, she told me she had had a wonderful dream that she was laughing with her departed husband and they were having a picnic. The following week, Jane fell into a deep sleep. It took 5 days for her to pass, and during that time, she only said one word over and over again: picnic. I think Jane was seeing the heaven that was awaiting her. Years later, when I saw the film About Schmidt starring Jack Nicholson, I was reminded somewhat of Jane. As the character Schmidt enters his retirement, the only person he is able to communicate with honestly is a little orphan boy in Africa to whom he sends money and letters but has never actually met. If I could communicate with Jane on the other side and ask her what the secret of a successful, happy, fulfilling life was, she would tell me what she told me in her final days: never to be afraid to express your emotions honestly and with respect for the feelings of others. And if I could ask the same question of Charles, in spirit, he would tell me to just let myself be happy. He would tell me to let go of guilt and those pesky shoulds and coulds and just be happy. Here is Charles's story. I'll call it Be Happy. Charles was the very last patient I saw before I left the care home and went to university. He was a delight. He had a filthy sense of humour, but got away with it somehow, as he was so lovable. I wrote to him for 2 years after I left the home, and when the reply stopped coming, I knew he had passed, but I always knew he had passed over smiling, because that's who he was. One particular interaction stands out. I brought Charles his afternoon tea, and I was feeling anxious, as I was prone to feeling anxious a lot in my teens. I was going through my goth phase, and there were difficulties at home, and I was awaiting my A-level results. Normal stuff. And I was very anxious because the results of my A-levels, of course, one path of my future depended on that. Charles instantly sensed my anxiety, and he told me to smile, as he always did. And I explained to him that it was quite hard to smile because I was worried. He then told me something quite remarkable. He told me that whether I got good grades or not, it didn't matter, because in heaven, the only thing we're graded on is how many times we choose to laugh. He told me he knew this to be true because when he was 15, he had almost died after falling off a ladder while window cleaning. He had been joking with a friend at the time, throwing sponges and water from a great height. The ladder wobbled and he fell into darkness. He told me in his near-death experience he went to heaven and met his great-grandfather there, laughing. And the great-grandfather told him that heaven had loved the way he passed over with laughter. But the gift he had of making other people smile was so precious he just had to go back and use it some more. Charles said he really hadn't told anyone about this, but he decided I needed to hear it. Of course, exams, career, earning money, and all those things do matter. We live in a material world and we have to look after ourselves materially. But at the end of the day, the only grade heaven is actually interested in is how much joy and love there is in your heart. Over the years, I have, to my regret, often forgotten Charles's profound words. But time and time again, memories of what he said have come back to remind, guide and reassure me. I'll conclude this section on the theme of courage with another story, this time from a lady called Alison. A lady I didn't meet at the old people's home, but she was someone I befriended during my university days when I went out in the community to visit old people. It was something I felt drawn to do at the time. I built up a friendship with Alison, and she told me over time I began to learn a lot about her, as you do when you go and spend time with people. She was perfectly fit and of sound mind. But for whatever reason, she ended up in a care home, so I would go to the care home to visit her there. I didn't bond immediately with her as I did with other people I went to visit, as I only knew her a few months before I actually left. But I did learn that she had battled against her parents' wishes to train as a lawyer and had studied music instead. I also learned that her parents were so angry with her decision that they cut her out of their will in disappointment. This hadn't daunted Alison, though, because life as a musician was all she felt called to do. Earning a living and devoting herself to her music meant there had been no time, however, for a relationship or a family. But when I asked her if she had any regrets, she didn't have a close family. She said she didn't regret one single thing. Music had filled her life every note of the way and had filled her heart with joy. And when she couldn't play any more, her music pupils had given her joy too. She also told me that whenever she felt in need of comfort, she just closed her eyes and went back in time to remember the magic of her performing career. She said that those days for her had never actually died, and that was why she believed in heaven, because her memories hadn't died, and neither, she thought, would she. Alison passed over on the penultimate day when I was leaving university. I never attended any of the funerals of the residents I visited before, but for some reason I really felt called to attend hers, which surprised me. As I said earlier, I wasn't as close to her as some of the other people I'd been meeting and having coffee and spending time with. Her funeral was, as expected, not at all well attended. It was very simple and plain, but that didn't seem to matter. As I watched her coffin being lowered into the ground, I knew she had lived a beautiful, fulfilling life, and she had always felt the presence of heaven, and now heaven was welcoming her with open arms. Alison had had the courage to be true to herself. It hadn't been easy because it had meant that she was cut off from her family and she hadn't had as many close relationships as we often think is important in life. But what she had followed her heart, and her heart had led her to music. It takes real courage to be that true to yourself. And I have had many moments of weakness and fear along the way, as I'm sure everyone listening has too. But let me reassure you that from all I have heard, read and seen, I truly believe heaven wants us to lead a life where we are true to ourselves and our hearts and not backed into a corner by the expectations of others. It doesn't matter what the world thinks or if others approve or disapprove. Live the life you want to live and live it like that from this moment on, because another potent lesson I learned from working with the dying or spending time with the elderly is that this life is very, very short. The present, the now, is all we really have. Live the now in the way your heart wants you to live it. This exercise sounds a little daunting, but it really isn't. Imagine you are 99 years old and you have a few hours left to live. You are lying in your bed, perhaps surrounded by people you love or perhaps comforted by memories. Think back on your life. Think back to now, the life you are leading right now. Would your dying self have any regrets about the life you're leading right now? Would your dying self urge you to make any changes? If the answer is yes, then start gradually taking small steps to change now, so that when your time eventually comes, as it does to us all, you will have lived a life of courage, a life where you can say you have been true to yourself, so you can cross over to the other side feeling happy about your brief but beautiful time on earth. Thank you for listening, everyone, and I hope you found this video soothing, and I hope you have sweet dreams. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and if you'd like to be notified when future videos come up, please hit subscribe. Thank you again. Any feedback is welcome. Stay
Stay spiritual and stay strong.